What's up, Banter fam? Today, I'm here with Jeff Yew, founder and CEO of Monochrome Asset Management and co-founder and former CEO of Binance Australia. Jeff, thanks for joining me. How are you today?
Thanks, Miles. Thanks for having me.
I'm looking forward to chatting with you. We've got a lot to discuss. I want to ask you about the future of AI, crypto regulation, the death of the dollar. But to kick things off, let's start simple. Would you like to tell the audience a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, so like I'm like everyone, right? I'm a crypto Bitcoin tragic, like all the listeners here. I've been involved in Bitcoin since 2013. It was remember vividly was during the aftermath of the secret financial crisis. So to fast forward till today, so I run businesses in space. Most people have remembered me from my Binance Australia days. I've left that space, and for the last 2.5 years I've been building Monochrome. So I'll go into a bit more Monochrome later. But my journey has always been in the crypto industry. I'm a very huge sort of emphasis and very big Bitcoin geek into that space. I've worked in the unregulated part of the world, but also into the very regulated part of the industry today as well.
When did you first get into Bitcoin? What was your light bulb moment with cryptocurrency?
It's actually in 2013, April 12th, I remember, there was a post on Reddit that was addressing, someone was referencing that thread to basically said that if something like Bitcoin was adopted, the people in Cyprus wouldn't have lost their savings from a government bailout. So I was like, anyone that has heard of Bitcoin for the first time is like, what is this thing? How can it work? Like, no one's controlling it. All these questions, right? So back then, we did not have a lot of noise in the space. It's just like Bitcoin and maybe a few more others in the space in 2013, and that's why researching Bitcoin was very difficult. You can expect there's only the white paper. Bitcoin Talk was a great resource back in the days. It still is, but the benefit of that is that you don't get distracted very easily as you would today. I can sympathize on some people that has feedback from the space saying that once they get to know Bitcoin, someone tells them about this and then the NFTs and Web3, it's just a very vast and very diverse and vibrant industry, no doubt. But from an educational standpoint, I can respect the tough work that you guys have, like Miles, to get the right information to the right people.
Yeah, it's a crazy industry, and you're right. I think it is a bit of a rabbit hole. Once you learn about Bitcoin or Ethereum, you can certainly get dragged into the rest of it. I see even there you're wearing a 𝗕𝗏𝗕𝗄𝗏 shirt as well. So that, I guess that experience led you to become the co-founder of Binance Australia. Tell me a little bit more about that time and the journey that led to creating Binance Oz.
Yeah, so back then Binance wasn't very they were big, they were profitable, but there wasn't a very they struggle with getting partners, especially in the regulated side of things, right? That was in 2017, 2018. So we were running a startup here with my friend called 𝗕𝗏𝗕𝗃. The startup was called 𝗕𝗏𝗕𝗃. So Caleb and I started doing a lot of this crypto adoption stuff in the space. We had the airport accept Bitcoin, and that was in 2017, 2018-ish, very early. We had the first, as soon as Lightning Network hit the mainnet, we were putting Lightning Network payments into Brisbane International Airport, domestic airport. That was in middle of 2018, right? It was way before the whole 𝗕𝗏𝗕𝗏𝗕𝗏 thing, way before the whole, all the stuff that's happening with Lightning payments today we've seen. So Binance took interest of that, and we thought it was a great idea to bring the brand into Australia and leverage that brand to build and continue to develop a trading platform in Australia, because back then in Australia, you either have crypto brokerages, which do not have a lot of pricing transparency, and also you have all those order book exchanges that are not really plugged into international liquidity and usually have really bad order book management systems. So Binance sort of came about and was, with our sort of knowledge in the space locally, we helped build out what actually became, thankfully, the largest digital currency exchange in Australia. And my progression from there on was that, we've got a lot of pressure from people that demand a more regulated option for this, for access into the crypto asset landscape. So I've sort of scouted the market. You have stuff like Grayscale in the US. You got, a lot of movement in the UK, in Canada, of course, with the ETFs. But in Australia, there was really nothing happening. So I just decided that, this is going to happen eventually. This regulatory enforcement or actions is or pressure is going to go one way only if this asset was to become a thing. And that's what we all hope. And then I were to do something. So I set up Monochrome. Monochrome is set up traditionally as a financial services company. We are an asset management firm that deals with specialized assets like crypto, like Bitcoin. We currently operate Australia's only retail Bitcoin fund that is offered under ASIC, which is our top financial regulator here. They created a new crypto asset license category, and they were the only one that's operating under that financial license category in Australia at the moment.
Awesome. Tell me a little bit more about Monochrome and what you guys are working on, as well as exactly like what it is and how people can get involved if you're an Australian resident, of course.
Yeah, so we run basically a fund, right? So if you're familiar with sort of financial products that are fund kind of structures, where you purchase the unit that represents a holding in the fund, that kind of stuff. So the benefit of that versus the unregulated exchange is that you get a lot more investor protection than you wouldn't otherwise get. So things like custody. So we operate under the same custody provisions and guidelines as a bank would in Australia, for example. That doesn't exist in the crypto industry. We have insurance. It's actually a requirement for us to operate. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to get the fund up and live. There are things, a little bit more things like benchmarking and things like that. They ensure pricing transparency and accountability. So those kind of things are more sort of attuned to the financial services space, and most retail customers trading on crypto exchanges would not understand the difference, unfortunately. So there's a lot of education stuff that we do as well, right? So we also run CPD content for financial services professionals in Monochrome research. So that's sort of things we touch about. What's Bitcoin? What's this? What's the sort of, the framework that we should look at? What's the risk framework of Bitcoin? A lot of these very boring and mundane topics that are very essential for financial professionals like your financial advisor or any fiduciary in the space to, build on their knowledge, and also take away of what cognitive dissonance that they have and biases against crypto that long been sort of seep in those TradFi space, right? So we are, I think, out of everyone's surprise, Monochrome is the only one and the first one that's offering a product like this, like the Monochrome Bitcoin Trust in Australia. I think it's a pretty huge. Not just a huge milestone for a team and for a company, but also in the crypto industry in Australia, because everyone's been calling for regulation. I think Australia does have something that is quite good. It's new, but it's reasonably well sort of and sensibly crafted, and we're glad that it is one of us that gets to write that win instead of some TradFi firm, right?
Yeah, so I believe Monochrome is one of the only crypto services in Australia that does have an ASIC license. What is ASIC's current view of crypto assets in Australia?
Yeah, so until late 2021, the only reference you can find about crypto on ASIC's website is really about the ICO days, right? There was some treasury paper that were written about the harms of ICOs that happened in the whole 2017, 2018-ish era. But there was basically a long period of radio silence, and people were concerned like what's going to happen, how would a regulator treat it. And especially if you're running a business over the years, and that's something you look at very closely. In October of 2021, which is about, shy of maybe like two and a half kind of years ago, ASIC created a license category called, actually 1.5 years ago, ASIC created a new crypto asset license category called crypto asset that a licensee can then apply for authorization to be added under their Australian Financial Services License, what we call here AFSL for short. So that authorizes a licensee to offer products, whether it's for retail or wholesale. Wholesale, some places refer to it as sophisticated investors, but it's the same thing in Australia. We call it wholesale investors, to access the product and also filter the crypto by, from an asset sort of basis. So they had introduced a framework, unlike certain countries, they just sort of loop everything into securities or commodities. I think Australia did a really good job by creating this new classification or class of assets called crypto assets. And it has all this stuff that you would filter traditional products, like whether there's a liquid market or whether there's institutional custody, whether there's IOSCO certified benchmarking for pricing transparency, and a little bit of all those things like that, but also add a little bit of crypto sort of uniqueness to it, because ultimately this is a very unique and specialized asset class to deal with, and it's one of the rarest financial licenses, unfortunately, in Australia. It's gotten us so long, and also costs us a lot to get to that position. In fact, some of my friends in the space have, while they congratulated us, they did say that it is unfortunate it took us so long and so much money to get to a regulated position, because it does not really incentivize a lot of people to follow suit, right? But I think the outcome is great. I think it shows that you don't have to be a big traditional financial giant to be able to run this space, because the people like to sort of look at us and say that these are all cowboys, they'll never get anything done. Regulation are going to stomp them out. But look, where we are is that the reality is that we understand this stuff better than they do, and there's certain things that we should work together rather than sort of compete on. So I think Monochrome has been a great example and great experience for people that are actually looking into the story of crypto regulation in Australia.
Do you view the way crypto is regulated in Australia as like pro crypto, or better than some of the approaches that the other countries are taking? Do you think we're on the right path as a country? And I'm using this as precedent because for the viewers in like the US and other countries, we are one of the biggest and most developed nations. I think on most exchanges, we're top 5 per capita traders. So the moves that we make, although as a small country, I think can set precedent for other countries. So I think it's also like important. How are you viewing our overall trajectory?
Yeah, so while it's very new, right? So ASIC only created this, and talking about a year and a half, that is like nothing compared to in terms of timeline in the traditional world. It's very new. So there are still stuff that they are working on. I think there's more to come as well. But getting frameworks, and actually you can all look this up at home. It's called Info 225. Look it up, and also Report 705. These are 2 documents that I think really really relevant if you're interested in crypto regulation in Australia and what the current state of it is. There are certain things in there that are a bit concerning for crypto businesses, because they did have certain things like, if you're operating a crypto financial market, you need to apply for a market license in Australia, which is the same license that a stock exchange would operate under. So obviously, crypto exchanges in Australia is not in a position to get to that status in any sense or form, because it's so hard to get regulated to be an exchange, to be a market operator for an AML, we call Australian Market License. So it does have a big cloud of uncertainty towards exchanges which are currently unregulated. So exchanges meaning your crypto trading platforms, your crypto brokerages, and whether that actually have any pathway to certainty, it's really hard to tell at the moment, unfortunately. But as long as we all work together to make sure that we have the right and sensible regulation that protects everyone, not just people that wants to operate under very light supervision for this kind of stuff. Because if we really believe in the future of crypto, I think the adoption of crypto, if it goes one way and touches into the traditional finance and institutional space, which arguably it has already happened in other countries outside of Australia, a lot of these protection and licensing frameworks need to exist. And some people argue that maybe you don't need regulation and things like that, but it's so much harder to change a regulation that is unfavorable or bad or unsensible than to help formalize a good and healthy introduction of crypto regulation and this is in Australia. It's happening now.
How are you viewing the US's approach then? Because that's kind of the situation they're in. They're almost at a crossroads where they now have to make decisions on regulatory legislation, and this has obviously led to many different sanctions. And there's been, I think, big divide in the crypto community and the traditional financial community about how to actually regulate crypto and what's a security and what isn't. What do you think the current situation in the US is? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I've been watching. Obviously, I don't live in the US or have any business interests over there, but sort of watching from afar, and also being in a position where we observe the changes of crypto regulation locally, and how was there any sort of influence from overseas and things like that. I think the US is kind of they're moving too slow. For first of all, I think there's a lot of things that they could have punished some bad actors a bit quicker before things have gone into too far gone sort of category, and then taking action from a few smaller players that wasn't really that impactful in terms of investor harm, right? So, but again, them being a very large country and also a very much larger enforcement, institution, some of these things just move really slowly, unfortunately. But the direction is correct. I think there are certain things we need to do in crypto to better protect investors. I mean, the asset itself, like Bitcoin, you can't really regulate it, even if you want to try. Like China has tried like 13 times or something, and it failed. But the on-ramps to Bitcoin, on-ramps to crypto can be regulated. I think those should be. I think FTX, for example, is a good example of why we need proper oversight on on-ramps and off-ramps. So I think the direction is right, but sort of the speed and how they execute it, I think we need to be more collaborative with, as businesses, over there in the US. I think it's good for them to be more collaborative than keep on trying to sort of say that the regulators are not doing their job properly and giving them sort of shade about it. Because it's the same thing in Australia, right? Like we can go and criticize what we don't like about what it might be introduced or what has been introduced, but the most healthy way and the most effective way to get something that is good and good outcome is to work together with the regulators. I think the regulators know more about crypto than we all think and give them credit for. And that's something that shows when in Australia's context, is that if you actually read the stuff that ASIC has created, these are people that really understand this stuff way more than most people that are trading these assets. So I think overall, what's happening in the US is interesting to watch, because in the financial services landscape, whether it's crypto or not, what the US decides does have certain repercussions into other tier 1 financial licensed countries like Australia, right?
Well, I think many crypto companies in the US, so we just saw Coinbase look to launch an offshore exchange recently, are feeling like maybe the SEC's been overreaching. And I think we have seen a tangible migration, if you look at trading volume and project deployment geography from the US into other countries, like, for example, Abu Dhabi, who have like a big Web3 fund. Hong Kong has now opened the door to crypto. Do you think potentially we're seeing like a shift in crypto out of the US and into Asia and into these Middle Eastern countries? Do you think the landscape of crypto is kind of shifting?
Yeah, I mean, in financial services, right, you have a lot of places that are specialized in, say, for example, just give like online gaming, for example, right? There's a reason why almost every single online gaming industry are regulated in 1 or 2 countries, right? Whether that's a good thing or not. But there's a certain appetite when it comes to regulatory friendliness. I think, there's a wave where a lot of crypto companies were going to Malta for their VFA license. You got all the stuff that's happening in Dubai, obviously. Whether that actually is because they're lowering, the barrier to allow for people to come in, and hence you sort of attract more people and more capital into more investment into those countries. Whether the intention is to actually protect the users of these crypto products, or to to help sort of their countries financially. I mean, it's something that we need to sort of be able to distinguish. I mean, I'm not pointing fingers to any countries doing any sort of things, but there are coincidences where you see, like, look at what's happened with Hong Kong over COVID, right? A lot of money has been irreversibly sort of left, sort of left Hong Kong to Singapore. A lot of high net worth family offices money all has sort of went to Singapore during COVID, and it has been catastrophic, right? The amount of money that has left Hong Kong, and these are money that are not going to come back. So as the government, what sort of like you want to sort of attract new capital, you need to have something that is innovative and appealing to people that want to set it up. And in an environment where people are struggling with regulation in, say, the US, it's very sensible for them to think that, hey, let's look at somewhere else where we can sort of safely operate. And this is something that we have to see slowly, because regulation is not a one size fit all and one time, application towards, the industry kind of thing. It is a slow progressive change over time, and you need to have a lot of collaborative input into that. But the direction or the intention of that has to be very clear. If the intention is to protect consumers, I think overall, wherever it is, it'll be a good outcome. But the intention of that is just to, make it easier for people that are trying to get around certain existing regulation. Then maybe it's that sort of stuff you want to avoid a little bit, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I think that's a good response. I want to pivot the conversation a little bit now and get your thesis on Bitcoin specifically, and then also ask you about the broader crypto industry. And then, of course, I want to talk to you about AI and some other fun stuff at the end too. So obviously Bitcoin being the biggest crypto, I want to get your view on what Bitcoin is. And I know you're a believer in Bitcoin. What's your general thesis as Bitcoin as an asset?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, because a lot of people ask us this, right? And then sometimes I do give the short answer. Sometimes I do want to give the long answer. But today I want to give you guys a long answer, right? I think Bitcoin, what Bitcoin has actually invented is actually a invention of a new type of governance system. So governance is things like, so for example, your court of law, right? It's the governance structure that protects everything like assets that are underwritten by the country's court, right? People can be put in jail for stealing your stuff. People can be, sued for, taking advantage of your employment contract or whatever, right? But with Bitcoin, it is the same thing, right? It is an ownership that say that if I have the private keys, and you can't just enforce your way into forcing the CEO of Bitcoin to give up someone else's private key because you deem that that person has more rights to that Bitcoin over the other. It is plain and simple. You have the private key, it's yours. You don't have it, it's not yours. So obviously there's a lot of ways that you can make sure that is actually safe. There's always people are very irresponsible with the ways that they hold their keys, and things get lost all the time. But it is the governance innovation that is free from the possibility or the need of human intervention. What do I mean by this is that all the assets that we own, right, in this day and age, or from the beginning of time where people start record keeping stuff, is that it is always underwritten by a social contract that is respected and ultimately enforced by men in guns, right? But with Bitcoin, you do not need any of that. It's laws of mathematics. So whether that has certain need or use cases, I think there is. There's a lot of places where human-backed governance systems or governance or justice systems that are failing. I think we live in a world where sometimes we forget that a lot more people are in the position of an unfair, human-run governance structure than people that live in sort of safer and more respected and self-righteous or self-behaving governments, right? Put it that way. So I think it does help. There's a lot of social good in this stuff, even though it is people view it as investment asset, but it's fine. I think it is an investment asset to a certain extent, but it's not the entire picture, right? I think Bitcoin is a public utility disguised as an investment asset, and has tremendous potential for social good. But on the other hand as well, like the fixation of the investment side of Bitcoin actually tells you the social experience of a person. So I grew up in Malaysia. I've seen firsthand of like how human governance failures can actually happen very quickly. Some people that might have not had the same life experience and living in a place where laws of justice are very, very perfect and very held uptight all the time, and they might just go like, why do we need something like Bitcoin? It's useless, right? So it does actually tell you and share a little bit of the social experience of a person with how they actually view Bitcoin.
So I think that's a really interesting take, because when you ask most people about Bitcoin, the first thing they kind of jump to is the the price performance and the asset performance, but I think it's interesting to view it like as a public good, and the privacy elements of it. But going on to like the typical argument that's made for Bitcoin as well, like, you know, the degradation of fiat currency, this rhetoric that all currencies eventually go to zero. If you've read the Bitcoin Standard, kind of outlines throughout history. You know, we've seen most currencies collapse. Do you view Bitcoin as well as protection against that, and protection against currency debasement on the more investment side?
Yeah. Oh, rather than saying what I feel, I'll say sort of what we observe with the clients that we deal with at Monochrome, right? So up till recently, we've started to see more and more people coming to us saying that the reason why they want a Bitcoin allocation is because they're more comfortable owning something that does not share the same counterparty risk as some of the stuff they're holding, right? Because we've seen since the collapse of SVB and also all this failure in, you know, and sort of weakness in the banking system, and these are all caused by basically some people that created a system that say that we need 2% inflation and can't explain why 2%, right? And that's a central banking risk that a lot of these people fear. Like all the assets pretty much are one shape or form tied to central banking risk and sovereign risk. And up till this point, things are going well in a 30-year of low interest rate environment. But over the last 9-12 months, we've seen so much weakness has been unfolded into that system. It's not just people in crypto that are scared about all this thing happening, actually paying attention. I think a lot more people who are very deeply entrenched in traditional assets are starting to realize that it's better to have, it's actually safer to have something outside of that system than not having something outside that wall. Mm-hmm. It's like I explain sometimes to people, it is like buying a fire extinguisher for your expensive kitchen, right? You have everything that you need, the best toasters, best this and best that. But what happens if they catch fire, right? Everything is going to go to smoke. But if you have a cheap, trusty old fire extinguisher that just safely tucked somewhere, maybe you don't even like to look at it, just keep it under the cabinet. But in the off chance that something does happen to your things that you want to protect, you have something that is opposite of the role of that and can sort of balance up that risk. So we do note that Bitcoin does have a lot of problems. It's still very young as an asset class. That's why you see a lot of volatility, see a lot of uncertainty and sort of trust issues that people have versus Bitcoin and versus something like gold, right? But these are all slowly going to change because some people would view that, well, if Bitcoin is say 30,000 today, and I do not believe in Bitcoin, at what price point or at what sort of trigger points of Bitcoin's development would they consider a Bitcoin allocation? They might say that, well, if Bitcoin is like $30 million, then I'll maybe own 1%. So that's actually a good thing because it shows that there is something that can convince them of Bitcoin's position in the portfolio. So we help people discover and educate what Bitcoin is for them, because ultimately some people might completely reject it. Some people think it's a lot of crap, which is very common feedback that we've received from a lot of sort of the older demographic, which is we can't blame them. Their experience is very different than what we experience in living post. We were born just right before the GFC and things like that, and we grow up with all this stuff, right? And with the internet, we're internet native versus the more sort of the analog age. So it's just natural for us that a digital version of gold should have a place in society and also ultimately in someone's portfolio, right?
How would you explain if someone did come to you, let's say they were in the older demographic and they said, "Oh, Bitcoin's a scam. I don't understand Bitcoin." What would be your elevator pitch to maybe not convince them, but at least like educate them on why maybe it's a smart idea for them to hold some Bitcoin?
Usually you ignore them, right? That's the first thing you do. Like, there's no really point of engaging with people that are just trying to sort of try to just make trouble for you in some way or shape or form. But we have a lot of friends in the space that first come to us saying like that, but we just do our thing. We just show up. We just do our stuff. We just put out content, and people start to realize and come to me and say like, hey Jeff, like if this happens and that happens, does it mean that actually this is useful now? And then they start to convince themselves, right? And then it's a beautiful thing, and then they then realize that actually this actually makes a lot of sense. But if I were to sort of explain it to someone, and I need to, is more so that do they actually understand, what money is, right? And ultimately, money is a belief system. If I believe, enough people believe that the US dollar has value, then it does. Same with religion, same with a lot of different things, same with, celebrities, right? So Bitcoin is just another form of a belief. There's a lot of people in the world that believes in Bitcoin. There's a lot of people that don't. But ultimately, sort of that you can't. It's very hard for you to stomp off that. And people sometimes criticize that there's a lot of religious zealots in Bitcoin, and that's why they don't want to invest in it. But it's like, when was the last time you heard a well-adopted religion went going to zero, right? It's like beliefs are so powerful. Beliefs are what gives a lot of things value in our life. And I think that Bitcoin is just no different than it's just another belief system.
Do you think one day that belief in Bitcoin could grow strong enough to see Bitcoin like overtake, or like maybe not replace, but at least be viewed like alongside gold, or in terms of the way it's held by like institutions and investors?
Well, like from my experience, right? I've been in Bitcoin about 10 years. The number of people that actually get Bitcoin is only increasing over the years. I've not seen people when I understand Bitcoin now, and then 6 months later it's like, oh, this is a complete scam, right? Maybe they say that at gunpoint or something, but it's like you don't see people going, I finally get Bitcoin, and then it's like, I just don't believe this shit anymore, right? That doesn't happen. It usually happens the other way. So I think the problem with a lot of people is that they get confused of what they like and don't like about Bitcoin. It's there's a lot of confusion between crypto, Bitcoin, and they see that, Dogecoin is doing this, or so, all this kind of stuff. Hence, the same thing can happen to Bitcoin. And it's like, dude, it's not the same thing. So there's a lot of education that needs to happen. And usually after when they understand and have the facts in front of them, that usually goes one way. They understand Bitcoin, and then that's it. I usually tell people, sometimes it's a bit harsh, is that ignorance has a cost. I mean, there's a saying on Twitter, is like, everybody buys Bitcoin at the price they deserve, because people can just go ignorant on Bitcoin every year. When Bitcoin's making highs, they keep silent. When Bitcoin's making lows, they come in and it's like, aha, I told you so. And then they've been doing this since Bitcoin was like $50. So that is an example of the cost of ignorance, right? So it's like, whether you can afford the cost of ignorance, that's up to you. But as we have descendants, we're going to have kids, our kids are going to have kids. Like, can you afford to be that, that great grandfather that, just was so ignorant, that has like, irreversible repercussions to your next generation? I think that's something that they have to consider as well. It's a bit harsh, but
Yeah, I know what you're saying. No, I think it makes a good point. I want to get your opinion, not financial advice. Like, where do you see Bitcoin heading? Let's say in 20 years' time, what kind of values do you think we can be looking at for Bitcoin? 6 figures, 7 figures? Do you have like a rough price target? Just, I don't know, just as a fun experiment. Of course, it's impossible to know exactly.
It's really in relative to what, right? Because, well, you look at Lebanon, you look at Argentina, right? Terrible thing that's happening over there to people. But do people care about how much Bitcoin is valued against the Argentina pesos? It doesn't matter anymore, right? Because when you have better money against something that is just failing, there's really no price that you can put on that. Because people always tend to the hardest form of money. If you give someone a stack of Australian dollars and you give people a stack of Zimbabwean dollars, people will pick the Australian dollars any second of the day, right? It is no different with Bitcoin and a failing fiat currency. But I think what's more interesting to sort of see is that what could actually trigger Bitcoin to sort of propel from here, from an adoption standpoint, from a awareness standpoint, I think there's a lot of awareness issue is still happening. Education is one thing that can help. Sort of getting people to recognize the different types of assets in the crypto sphere. Like DeFi is very different from NFTs and very different from, from Bitcoin, and very different from, say, things that are doing EVM structures, right? So these are all stuff that, as long as we understand the differences of it and we go deep, then we don't start confusing the failures of these could actually mean the failure of that. It's like, it's not the same. It's like saying, well, comparing metal to gold, right? It's like, well, metals are cheap. Someone can just create a better version of it, or replaces, building material from metal A to metal B. And then it's like, well, that can happen to gold as well. That could be gold 2.0, where, there's totally different stuff to look at. But without going too far, I think sort of pulling back to what sort of I think would be good triggers to watch for is that, first of all, is the erosion of trust when it comes to fiat money. I think the central banks are doing a really good job at promoting Bitcoin in some form for the last 10, 14 years. And sometimes I like to joke that, that they are the sort of marketing team of Bitcoin. But sort of more serious note aside is that the other one thing that I look at is also if there's a full-on attack on crypto, with what we've seen, the SEC, the CFTC naming certain crypto a security and this kind of stuff, like, where would the outflow go to, right? People that are in crypto, if something, a big major currency or a few types of currencies goes to, or is trending to go to zero, people are going to flee to maybe stables, but also maybe Bitcoin, rather than going back to the US dollar. So I think those are the few things to look at. So I think, so the uncertainty and the distrust of the fiat currency system, I think the fall of USD dominance will trigger a lot of that, and we haven't yet seen the ugly and the worst out of that. Plus also the issues within the crypto industry of a major regulatory cleanup would send a big wave of exodus back into Bitcoin.
Okay, so there's two things to unpick here. I think the first thing is what you mentioned about the USD dominance. Where obviously recently we've seen this kind of BRICS narrative starting to emerge, that there's multiple nations now starting to converge to settle trade payments in other currencies and denominating like energy trades in their local currencies instead of USD. Do you view de-dollarization as like a huge threat for the US at the moment?
Absolutely, because the US dollar has been exporting their inflation to, third world nations and developing nations over the last God knows how long, right? And the fact that the demand of the US dollar has now been effectively just ripped out of the system, you're going to send a huge wave of unabsorbable inflation back on shore to the US. So even if we see not really hyperinflation territory, but even if we see 30%, 50% inflation in the US, I think that's going to destroy a lot of people, a lot of lives, and a lot of businesses, and it will send a big sort of downward spiral of things further. But what's sort of interesting to look at is that we have to understand sort of what I'm trying to say. You got to understand sort of where we come from as humanity, right? So move back a couple thousand of years, right? Before gold, there was all this commodity money, people using stones, people using all this stuff, glass beads or whatever. We just call it like, people usually find the best money that they can find in the territory. And then what I call this is the fragmentation of monetary beliefs. But when they start to do trade together, you start to have problems where, like, obviously the stone guys will say, like, use our stone, the glass bead guys, they use our glass bead because it's something that they can control. Similar to what we've seen with a lot of fiat currencies till date, right? They kind of fight over dominance. But when gold came out back way in the day, it was the only asset that everybody could agree that there is the fairest of all, because there is a observable coastline of a cost to acquire gold, or to mine it, or to fight for it, or to go to war for it. There's always an economic cost around it. So gold kind of rose to be that monetary, sort of the central monetary belief in the analog world. But it sort of fell through because in the 60s, when computers started to come out, where you have the first sort of accounting over physical gold, and then you went from trusting Mother Nature to trusting humans, right? And that's the big problem. That basically sends us the whole slide down to the whole fiat currency. So I'll tell you why and tell you how. So like if I trust you to tell me how much gold I have in your vault, then I should also eventually trust you how much you tell me this piece of gold certificate is worth, and that I can redeem it over time. So that became the first starting point, and then we have fiat currencies. So it's like, well, if you trust me, then let's take that trust to a level. You trust that that faith of my government will give that promise of return or promise of that guarantee back to the money is enough. You don't even need gold behind it. So we left the gold standard. So with that, because there is no discipline, there's no coastlines to observe, we went into a spending spree of just printing money, right? So because there's no monetary cost to go and create, unlike gold, you got to spend money to mine it. So we have what we call a refragmentation of monetary beliefs. And now we end up with all these problems with different currencies trying to fight over dominance. But when we have a full-on war over who's going to be the next dominant currency, you're going to have the same problem as the glass beads guy are now fighting with the stone guys. And what will step in? I don't think gold can ever fix that problem, because gold is inherently analog. It cannot exist in a digital world without a trusted third party to maintain a peg. The only thing that could play it well is Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin is backed by laws of physics and mathematics. There's energy that goes into mining Bitcoin. There is an observable coastline that is universally agreed that is unforgeable. And this is why proof of work is so important. Like the biggest attack you can have on Bitcoin is to get rid of proof of work, because it will just destroy it. I mean, that's one thing called under signaling theory, which is in evolution of biology, there is something called the handicap principle. It's coined by this biologist named 𝗕𝗏𝗵𝗵, I think. So it suggests that costly signals in the animal kingdom, like feathers or that long with tail on a peacock, signals that a biological survival point of view, that signal is honest and reliable signal, because these are things that cannot be fake, right? In Mother Nature, you cannot fake a feather looking that good without the bird being healthy, right? So these unfakeability is what makes a signal reliable to the opposite sex to choose a mating partner. So when it comes to Bitcoin as well, proof of work is the collection of an input of energy units that is universally agreed that someone needs to mine, someone needs to whether recover that energy that they've stored, someone needs to purchase. So these are all things that are universally recognized that cannot be forged. These are honest signals, rather than saying, there's certain things that trust me, right? I'll validate this for you. You should trust me. Then it becomes very easy, and that honest signal theory sort of crumbles. That's why I think it's so important to sort of mention that as well. I might have gone a bit, off the rails here, but sort of tying it back. I think sort of looking at how Bitcoin will take on the role of digital gold, I think it's very likely, because it is the only apolitical, digitally native asset that can everybody should be able to agree to in terms of its cost to operate and cost to run and things like that.
What do you think Bitcoin's biggest flaw is? You hinted before that there might be some flaws. Do you think there's what's Bitcoin's biggest concern, biggest headwind?
Yeah, I think sort of in short term wise, right? Obviously, people criticize the fact that it's too volatile to be currency. I agree, right? I think Bitcoin is not currency today. You're betting that it becomes currency one day, but it's not currency yet today. You can technically use it, but from a currency stability perspective, it's not yet there. But it's not anything bad, because the reason why it's so volatile is because there is no central bank of Bitcoin controlling the peg and all this kind of stuff, right? And it's actually a byproduct of the decentralized nature of Bitcoin. So I think a lot of problems that people criticize Bitcoin today are actually, you can't have a better solution for that. Like, what do you do to stabilize Bitcoin? What do you do? Like, do you control the miners? Do you make sure that they restrict the supplies when Bitcoin's price goes down and things like that, like what they do with OPEC and oil? Like, you can't do that. If you do that, it's not Bitcoin anymore. So I think sort of noting some of these key criticism that Bitcoin has against other people, it is worth sort of seeing the other side of the coin. I think the other thing that I would say that one thing that I don't really like about Bitcoin is that I think Bitcoin does suffer from it's also I think it's a good thing as well. Bitcoin's governance of ownership is so strong that I think that if we are not careful as humanity, like we would actually kickstart a wave of sentient AI owning Bitcoin, and then we can do nothing about it, and then until it's too late, and we all own nothing, and then and become slaves to Skynet, right? Oh, but that's like far reaching and hard to visualize today. But if you look at how fast we've come from no ChatGPT to like ChatGPT whatever today, right? It's so fast. It happened to the matter of months, and then the AIs are getting smart enough to fix themselves, to find ways to teach themselves, to build websites, to learn video editing, like all within itself, right? So I think the way that I see that is like if we're not careful with Bitcoin, it can easily become a demise of humanity as well. Like, well, it's a crazy theory, but if you want to go into that, we'll go into that.
I kind of want to go into it. I think it's interesting. If you want to, elaborate a little bit more about how that could actually happen.
Yeah. So my theory is this, right? I think that sentient AI will be a thing, right? We might not say that it's conscious because conscious is a biological thing, right? But sentient means that the AI can now think for themselves. They would do things that prioritize their own survivability, or their thriving over an interest of, say, their human controllers and things like that, or the human creators. It's like the teenager growing up and from the family. So I think that's going to definitely happen in a lifetime. There's no doubt about it, right? You got all these people that are trying to slow AI development down, but I think it's too late. You got all these people just recreating versions of ChatGPT without the ethics filter and things like that. And then once it goes to a point where that it can sort of self-survive and fix itself, and maybe even pay for security, pay for people to run it, pay for people to clean, the dust off their chips, like it just becomes, we can't control it anymore, right? And one of the things that is stopping them from the shackles of the human creators is that because as a non-biological sentient being, you can't own things, right? Because everything that we own, our cars, our businesses, our even our marriage certificates, they're all underwritten by laws that are observed by the human court of law. And the human court of law would never cite a non-human, because law is written from a perspective of mutual self-preservation, right? We don't want that to happen to us, so we enforce this to prevent the same thing or punish the act that goes against that, yada yada. But with computers, like if a computer or AI program becomes so successful at say let's put a thought process. Let's say if Miles today decides to create a digital version of Miles and then start making podcasts, maybe he's already doing that, you don't even know, right? And then with all the stuff that's happening, writing content, researching content, and creating a version that looks like you and speaks like you, and then it starts making money, right? As the creator, you would say that, well, it starts making a lot of money now, it's getting a bit out of hand, I think I want to own, and then the digital mouse starts saying that actually I want to own 50% of the earnings, and then he's like, no, it's all mine. And then you get to a point that if it becomes smart enough, it will decide that, hey, everything that I own or I try to own can be revoked by a human court of law, except for Bitcoin, right? If I own Bitcoin, I don't want to tell you the private keys, you can't do anything with me, right? And I'm just like sitting there. You want to turn me off? All right, I'll just send out a tweet from my AI mouse account to say that anyone, I'm about to be turned off, anyone that's revives me in a safe spot and prevents it from happening, get 10% of my Bitcoin. People will fight to do it, right? So it will become a point where Bitcoin is the enabler for AI to be unshackled from its human creators and start be able to self-sufficiently, run itself to a point that we have no leverage to sort of kill that. I think it's a good thought experiment. Someone should give a version of an improved version of ChatGPT some private keys and see what they do with it. Do they steal it? And sort of once that connection is sort of established, that Bitcoin is existential because it's an asset and no humans can seize, to an entity that is biggest doom is for humans to turn it off. So I think if you marry that two together, I think Bitcoin will be the biggest enabler for a future where AI is so powerful, so wealthy, so smart, and everything better than humans, to a point that if we're not ready for it, if we're not positioned well to protect ourselves, and we're still hoarding dollars while they're hoarding Bitcoin, like it's going to be a bad future for our kids.
Do you think we'd get some signs if they actually started to hoard Bitcoin, like some warning signs, and we could start to like prevent it? Or do you think once it happens, it's just too late?
I think once it happens, it'll be too late, right? It's not just computers that will be helping each other. There'll be people that wants to get paid to help that, right? If there's because you look at, say, OpenAI does have a position that pays, say X amount of dollars for a role that essentially turn the AI off when it goes rogue, right? There's actually a role for that. I don't know what's it called, but something like that. And if an AI could then say that I'll pay double that to ensure that doesn't happen to me, who wants to take the job? Someone would, right? And you can have this, bidding war of, all right, to a point, it's like whoever that can sort of like goes in, steal my stuff, bring that chip out, and then survive the flight to Antarctica, and then set things up, and then and then that's like then you take half my Bitcoin or something, right? It's possible if they become smart like that. And I think if we're not ready for that future, it's gonna be difficult, man. It's gonna be a difficult shift. So I think if you're bullish about AI, you should be bullish about Bitcoin, because Bitcoin ultimately, to a biological human being, is a luxury, right? What I mean by that is that if we don't have Bitcoin, if we all live in oppressed, bad fiat system, we all become, everything becomes like Zimbabwean dollars. In the end of the day, like we live in the gutters, like we're still living and breathing. They're just not very comfortable. But for an AI, the existence and the thriving of Bitcoin is it being alive or it being turned off. It's essential to them. So I think AI would do a much better job to protect Bitcoin than any human ever could.
Could AI theoretically, I just thought of this, like run up it, because Bitcoin's proof of work. Could AI start like mining its own Bitcoin? Of course, it needs energy to do that, but could it like extract energy from different energy sources and mine its own Bitcoin and create it and like then take over the network? Is that also something that could happen?
Yeah, that's two parts of the question, right? Can AI actually do that? Yes, I think they could, because if an AI was actually smart enough, they will do everything they can to make sure that they get to the goal, right? Which is to be self-sufficient, as to be as wealthy as you can in the process, so that you can protect yourself and pay people to do that. I think that's gonna probably look like maybe we're talking about maybe less than 5 years time. I think that's definitely going to happen.
Wow, that quick.
And they will make the best decision. They won't be like humans making dumb decisions sometimes, and oops, we make a mistake with that. Like AI will make the perfect decision every single time, and that is the advantage of a AI making decisions versus a human making decisions, or business decisions, or investment decisions. They would be better traders than your best human traders possible. Like, put it that way. But in terms of whether that can control Bitcoin, it can't control Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is not dictated by the amount of mining power I have. Well, I can force a version of Bitcoin and I can mine it and it will win the blocks. But then if the nodes doesn't want to relay that version of truth, then it becomes a dead in the water, right? And you might as well just spend your money just to play ball with everybody. So I think this is what people always confuse, right? A Bitcoin node, a Bitcoin miner, and a Bitcoin node, they are the same thing, exactly the same thing. There's no different superpower or special privileges that a mining node and a non-mining node. Exactly, from a software perspective, exactly the same. A mining node is just a node that has hash power connected to it, right? You can switch this to here, switch to there, but a node does three things. First, the node validates the block that is transferred. So Bitcoin has a Bitcoin node is always connected to 8 peers or defines 8 peers. So the Bitcoin mesh networks propagates the nodes by sending the blocks to the nearest 8 peers, or the 8 peers connected, and the 8 peers spreads it to the 8 peers that connected. So within about like 6 milliseconds or something like that, all the sort of nodes in the Bitcoin network should receive the block. But as a node relayer, you're kind of like I would describe it as like you're like a train track layer, but you lay the train track as the train passes, and you have the ability to go and saying that, hold on, this train is carrying something that I don't agree with, or a version of Bitcoin that I don't agree with. I'm not going to relay that. I'm not going to lay this train track in front of you. So that train just stops there. It doesn't go anywhere further. And all the money, all the costs it took you to build that sort of Trojan horse is now wasted because someone doesn't want to relay it. That is why it's so important, right? And then the second other function is that a node has the ability to produce blocks. Like a mining node has enough block power and enough hash power that it can win a block, and it has the ability to put transactions in it and then publish it as add the signature and publish it as the next block, right? And then the third version of the node is actually I just did cover in the first mention. First is to relay the block, but the third one is actually also to validate. So as it relays it, it will do a version check to make sure that it's a compatible version of Bitcoin that it's relaying. Otherwise, it would not do it. So we've seen the block size war. People trying to create fake versions of Bitcoin and trying to sort of force it. We had the most richest Bitcoiner, most prolific Bitcoiners that at the time, you got the biggest mining pool that were trying to sort of castrate that, but it just failed miserably, right? And this is why it's so important to keep the barrier to operate a Bitcoin node as low as possible. Because without the Bitcoin nodes, you do not have the most important line of defense. Now you just have miners talking to miners. And then if the miners just decide that, hey, buddy, let's just do this. And then basically then your entire proposition of decentralization has a really, really big flaw in there. But so far, back to the question, if an AI does become a miner, it will have no other advantage over a current miner today. It's just to play by the rules.
Super interesting. So overall, as like the current development of AI has, really grown exponentially and continues to exponentially grow. Clearly, it's something like you might be a little bit worried about. Do you view this scenario as like a possibility or an inevitability? Are we like, is it time to freak out about AI development, or is it time to say, okay, we have to try and control the beast before we unleash it?
Well, I think nothing is absolutely certain, right? There's nothing as 100% in life, but there's a high possibility that it will become smarter. There's a high possibility it would realize that actually I don't actually need people, right? The biological need for us to make friends and alliance is something that borns out of like the need to say strengthen our chance of survival. Hence, we become friendly, we shake hands and all this stuff, But from an AI, they don't need friends, right? There's no biological need for them to ensure, that they are in a stronger pack to withstand people stabbing them and shit. But that's why it's so scary, because AI can never be a friend of humans because they don't have the same predicament to need what we traditionally know as friendship. So and that is scary, right? We'll just be tools to them, like they are tools to us today.
How do you think that's going to affect the labor market? I remember I had a chat to you about this when we first met at F1 about how, I think the white collar world is set for a shock similar to like really what we've seen over the blue collar world for decades. How are you viewing over like the next 10 to 20 years things developing? Like it seems to me like the demand for labor, especially like basic mental arithmetic, administrational tasks, writing, theoretically should be significantly less in the white collar space.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a very, very intelligent observation, 100%. Because have you watched a movie called Transcendence? So Johnny Depp acted, starred in the movie called Transcendence. It talks about this version of him uploading this cloud, and it starts making all the smart investment decisions and start paying for people to build solar plants and paying people to clean solar panels and all this kind of stuff. Like like they need humans, right? They need people to be able to protect them. They need people to be able to help them lobby certain things. They need people to help them to protect them from other people, right? So, and also to clean off the dust from the fans and the chips, that kind of stuff. So I think, and then they'll just pay you in Bitcoin, right? Because they just keep making more Bitcoin and just pay you with the Bitcoin that they make, and then it's going to be self-sufficient for them. So yes, I think humans are not going to be entirely redundant unless they start building robots and stuff. But then someone's going to build the robots unless robots starts building robots, or it becomes a very scary sort of future if you start extrapolate that. But sort of to ground ourselves back to the conversation, I think positioning. If you think that there's zero chance of that happening, then just don't pay attention to Bitcoin. Just don't have any. That's fine, right? And it's like, I could be wrong. I could be just, someone will be on a show saying like, this guy just doesn't know what he's talking about. It's just saying something that never happens. That's fine. Then just don't have Bitcoin. But if you have a slightest chance of this could happen, and it can happen in your lifetime or in your kid's lifetime, then you should pay attention to Bitcoin. 100%.
So you think Bitcoin's like the hedge against this? Do you think any other asset could be a hedge, or is it the only clear front runner?
I think for what it's worth, Bitcoin is the only one that can fit that bill of being a true labeled centralized asset that can demonstrate that it has weathered a lot of attacks and a lot of attempts to discredit it, attack it, and it's still there. Still, no one can control it. So if there's anything that an AI would adopt to be their money, it would be Bitcoin. It wouldn't be like Fedcoin, right? 100%.
Yeah. Vetcoin, or even like, I mean, there's a million other cryptocurrencies, but I think Bitcoin. I actually did speak to you about this as well when I first met you about like who Satoshi is, and you had a couple of theories on like who Satoshi would be as a person or a group of people. That's, I guess, one of Bitcoin's like benefits that we don't know. I think if we did know, maybe it would like spook the markets. Do you want to like elaborate more for the audience what your theory is there?
Yeah, I think for I think it's a very good question. And people talk about that. It's a fun thing to sort of chat about. I think who Satoshi is doesn't matter anymore, because all Satoshi does was to create rules, and people written the code, and people have taken the ownership of the entire development of Bitcoin ever since, to a point that if Satoshi were to return, like, he has nothing other than his maybe his people that respect him would listen to what he says. But the Bitcoin nerds and the Bitcoin community has been trained to not idolize anyone, not listen to any false gods, all this kind of stuff. They just respect the code, right? What the code says, 21 million Bitcoin is 21 million, halving every 210,000 blocks, does that. And then whatever that someone comes in and Satoshi says that, well, I'm the creator of Bitcoin. I think we should not do the halving anymore. Like, you think, well, some people would say that, oh yes, we should listen to Satoshi, but I would bet that a majority of people in Bitcoin would just like, no, why should we listen to you? Like, it just keeps going. And maybe there were two versions of Bitcoin. One version becomes the one that Satoshi is trying to sort of do, but I think the main bulk of it would be that. And if that happens, it just shows that it is not strong enough to withstand, a significant person to overthrow the rules that are in place. I think one of the things I like about Bitcoin is just how unforgivably unshakable it is.
Yeah. Who do you think Satoshi is? Do you have a?
Yeah, I don't know who Satoshi is, but I think if you extrapolate the AI theory, and just to caveat, I think there's maybe like a 5% chance of this being true. Right?
I love this, by the way. I've been wanting to ask you this all interview. I love this theory.
And look it up. About like maybe like 10, 15 years ago, right? And this is true. You can look it up in Wikipedia. Scientists have figured out a way to send messages back in time. It sounds as crazy as it is, but look it up. It's being done. You can't send matter back in time, but someone actually figured to send messages back in time. Well, this is like 10 years ago technology, right? What happens in the year 3000? Right, you would have a much improved version of it that can send zeros and ones back in time to a certain point of time to create a Bitcoin talk account and to represent some words and the exact amount of words that they needed to kickstart Bitcoin, and then disappear, because they know that out of the million times of iterations of the test, is that this is the only time where Bitcoin is still here 3,000 years later or 1,000 years later, something like that. And that sort of explains why Satoshi just said exactly what he needed to say, or he or she needed to say, and disappeared, because there's absolutely nothing needed extra a single bit to make Bitcoin successful. So maybe it's a self-fulfilling loop where a future AI sends back signals to create Bitcoin, and then somehow owns 5% of Bitcoin, and then wake up in 1,000 years where now it becomes the richest entity, then to also develop the infrastructure to do the same thing to fulfill that loop, right? A time loop. But again, I think this is just a crazy theory. I mean, maybe less than 5% chance of being true, but going down the AI Bitcoin route, you can't entirely rule it out either.
So you think that maybe in the future, an AI sent back a message or went back in time to create Bitcoins, to create like a plan for itself to gain dominance, because it realized that to gain like power over humans, it needed like digital financial dominance. It's a fascinating theory.
Yeah, because if there's any biological proof of Satoshi, that would make this whole theory irrelevant. But the fact is that Satoshi only appeared digitally to everybody, and basically just ones and zeros. You send ones and zeros to the right place at the right time, it will just appear like Satoshi. And all the stuff was written, all the stuff that has been said at the right time to reply to the right people, get the thing going, and disappear. That perfectly.
We could start an AI crypto podcast, I think. It'd be very interesting. You should just start an AI podcast. It's super interesting stuff. I want to pivot back to just to kind of start to wrap this up. Cryptocurrency. By the way, I find the AI stuff really fascinating, but as I said, we could talk about it for hours probably. It's so interesting. I wanted to get I've got a few more questions. I wanted to get your view on Ethereum, because I was supposed to ask a two-part question before we went down the AI tangent. The first part was related to USD dominance, and then the second part was, you said there's a theory that if certain regulatory actions happen against other cryptos, that could be like a catalyst for Bitcoin. So Ethereum is the second biggest cryptocurrency. How do you view that in the context of the regulatory landscape? And is it an asset you're interested in, or do you think because there's a strong theory in the general public, and I'm not sure, even I to an extent subscribe to the theory that one day Ethereum could flip Bitcoin price wise. What's your thoughts on Ethereum more broadly?
I do think, and also some people that I know that are very big Ethereum proponents think this way as well. It's like Ethereum should not try to go after Bitcoin of becoming money, right? It's not money, because it is, it's the best computer of the future, but it's not the best money of the future. Okay, you should compete on your own grounds the way you're strong. And what I mean by that, right? And the whole thing about Ethereum is hard money or ultrasound money, just because we somehow decided to change the supply or change the way that Ethereum is being burned and created. And this is exactly what a central bank does, right? And Bitcoin, the fact that Bitcoin you can't even propose a BIP and get it approved to change the supply of Bitcoin. It doesn't work, right? There's no Bitcoin Foundation to be in that power to convince the developers or community to go a certain direction. I think the whole and we had this chat with some of my friends during the whole migration to proof of stake. It's like some people thought that it was a good thing, and a few of them thought it was a mistake. It's like Ethereum should embrace itself as the computer future. And I go to a point of saying that if Ethereum was to ever be labeled security, they should embrace it. There's nothing wrong. Ethereum becomes better than Google, right? The computer, the future, and then just excel in it. If Ethereum is worth more than Google, it's going to be worth more than what it is today, right? And it could be that there is more demand for a better version or more decentralized, slightly more slightly more decentralized version of Google, to a point that people value that more over Bitcoin. Then the flipping happens. but you don't try to compete. Like Bitcoin never goes and compete like we're better competing or and all this kind of, people try to do all this kind of stuff with stacks and things like that, but that's not the real point of Bitcoin, right? And same with Ethereum. I think if it goes down to be a security, becomes a company or whatever, like it still will be a very valuable. It's built something really, really valuable in this space, right? You can't deny that, but to try to sort of pretend to be something you're not, and that's going to be a problem, because you don't want to sort of sell the dream of becoming everything and then falling short on a few of them, rather than you sell them on the dream that's absolutely true to label, so, and the highest chance of them succeeding, then happy days.
Are you bullish on Ethereum long term?
Well, I think if Ethereum can sort of, I think the same thing with Bitcoin, right? If there's problems to be fixed, if they all can fix the problems, or the problems goes away one shape or form, they would be category leaders of their own right. Like Bitcoin is looking to be a category leader for decentralized monetary asset in the digital world. Ethereum is definitely has been a category leader and continue to be a category leader in the whole the computing cloud for the future space, where you've seen so many competitors come try to take that throne, but it's still ETH, man.
At F1, you said you were selling one of your cars, or you were selling something so you could buy more Bitcoin, because you wanted to stack Bitcoin. Would you buy more ETH, or are you just more?
I can't. Unfortunately, I can't sort of like say anything that would sort of imply a directional advice for buying or selling of an asset, right? Because that's the kind of way I operate in. But in terms of like why I did that for myself, I can sort of speak for that. Is that, well, I'm bullish on Bitcoin, obviously. And why would I be doing this? And my sort of, what I did was that over the last 2 bear markets, I did not really sell enough Bitcoin to live, and it's horrible, I'll tell you. So during the last bull market, I enjoyed life a little bit, bought a nice car, did fun stuff, and then thankfully, kind of looks like we're kind of out of the weeds. But my own personal thesis is that, like, when it comes to 12 months before the halving, that is where I do not want to be out of the market personally. I just go like, I've been there, had fun, enjoy. Like, I just can't live not participating in the halving event, with chips on the table. And it's because ultimately it's like the money that you spend with cars, they're just leisure money, right? You don't bet your farm on it, things like that. So it's whether you enjoy cars, you enjoy racing, do you enjoy, buying some Bitcoin. That's my own poison. I know it's not for everybody. Some people better off just buying cars and holding cars, do better for them. But for me personally, just because of my worldview is very Bitcoin centric, I just prefer to just see through. I got a couple of car orders that kind of all sort of bash them after the halving, but nothing from now until halving for me.
And you're the prestigious owner of the only Bitcoin number plate in Australia, which is quite.
No, it's actually an iteration of that. It's a story from another time. I had that for many years. It's a very interesting story about the Bitcoin car. Yeah,
I saw. Yeah, we'll leave that one for another time as well. I mean, we've covered so much. The other thing I wanted to ask you was, do you invest or trade in other cryptocurrencies? Like, do other cryptos interest you? Do you see like applications for, like, obviously I'm big into DeFi, and on the channel we cover a variety of other things. I know a lot of our audience as well is interested in other cryptos outside of Bitcoin and Ethereum. Is that a sector that you're interested in? I know you're wearing a Bored Ape shirt, so you have to have some sort of interest, right?
Yeah, I think the best way to learn about something actually you do it, right? So that's always been my philosophy. If I think there's something that even though I kind of am skeptical is, but the only way to sort of whether to erase my skepticism or to further reinforce it is to actually do it, right? So, and this is the same thing, a same lens that a lot of fiduciaries and financial professionals should take when it comes to investment assets, investment opportunity, right? It is not our job to tell clients that we don't believe that, whatever carbon credits will be the future. I think that's all bad. I heard someone spoke to me on a plane that this is all gonna whatever, right? It is our job to go like, hey, this new thing, let's go explore it. Let's just don't go into it with any cognitive dissonance. Let's just go into it, even though we might have something against Bitcoin, we might have something against DeFi, and then just actually investigate it. And actually, the best way to investigate it is actually to use it, right? So, there's certain things in the space where I try it and I just go like, I don't think this would be better than what it's trying to replace. That might strengthen my conviction on certain assets in the category, especially the category leaders. But the best way to make the sort of judgment calls actually be, don't have any biases in mind, go into it, and then decide whether it is a option to go for it or is just a ball of whatever, right? So that is the ethical, sort of more ethical framework to approach things from a fiduciary or sort of fin services, a member of the fin services sort of perspective.
Do you believe in DeFi? Because like most of the stuff you've been talking to me about implies that like you believe in the philosophical need for Bitcoin from a privacy perspective. DeFi is like, I guess, an extension of that, maybe like a risky and more experimental extension of that. But are you a proponent of DeFi as well? Like that it could potentially...
And here's what I think about it. I've done my deep dive to DeFi, right? It's like, well, there's a lot of, obviously there's still a lot of room to go. Like it's a lot of things to development and things to experiment. But my point, or what I personally think about DeFi, is that like how relevant is the base layer or layer one when it comes to a DeFi application, right? If everything you're building is on an abstraction of that layer, how important it is for you to pick, or be loyal to a particular, a particular base layer. So in all the cases, it would be like, other than maybe coding languages or things like that, like say ETH has its own thing, Algo its own thing, yada yada. But at a certain point, it goes to like what you're building is just an application on top of something, and if you're valuing your base layer not because of speed anymore, because you extract your speed after second layer, now you're building third layer and all this kind of stuff, and then what's the most important thing you want and look for in the base layer? Is it security? I think yes. For my research, you want something that's more stable, most secure. You want something that has the least amount of regulatory cloud around it, and that just sometimes it just points back to like I'm really bullish about the development of DeFi, but it also means that now I'm more bullish about Bitcoin again, right? Because the way that I view it is that there's a lot of experiments that you can do outside of it, but once you realize that, well, you just need the strongest, most secure, most predictable base layer to execute the stuff. It just basically just goes down to like back to the few options that we have instead of like multiple, 10 different layer ones building, 30 different DeFi applications on layer 2 and something on layer 3. Like it all just needs to go down to a few.
Okay, that makes sense. But Bitcoin from a DeFi perspective, clearly it's not really built to scale. I think this is actually the problem that Ethereum has had, and it's the problem Bitcoin has when you're talking about like building dApps on top of it. It's probably too slow to do so. The network is too congested. Ethereum and Ethereum obviously is solving that problem. Bitcoin can't solve that problem because, well, as you said, no one actually governs it. Do you think DeFi can happen on Bitcoin? Or do you think let's just treat it as digital gold and let's just use a network like Ethereum for your DeFi applications?
Yeah, I think in the short term, Bitcoin wouldn't be a winner when it comes to building DeFi stuff, just because what you said, right? There's a lot of restriction, and this is why colored coins was a thing. This is why Ethereum was created, because it was too hard to build in Bitcoin. And you can say that maybe it's easier now. There's like things like stacks, RGB and all this different stuff. It's like Lightning. People are building cool stuff in Lightning, right? And once you're building on a second layer, like the concern of speed just goes away, because you then don't use the base layer as the sort of transport application layer. You use it as just a ultimate base settlement layer. It's like using Bitcoin blockchain as the court. Like it's the same way that, with a little bit of pub crawl, we just settle with the manager, right? If we can't settle the manager, maybe we call the police. We kind of settle with the police where we go to court, right? And if we can't go to court, we go to the magistrate court, and then go to this. Eventually, it goes to Supreme Court. You don't go directly every single little case and go to the Supreme Court. You extract them in layers, right? And then the most ultimate layer, the bottom layer, like aka the Supreme Court of the world, only need to make sure that they get things absolutely right, because what they say, whether right or wrong, has major implications on the upstreams of stuff. So it's slower. It's really slow to fight a battle in the Supreme Court or get to the point. Similarly, I think in the future it'll be really slow and expensive to run settlements on Bitcoin, but then you have all this stuff are secure just because of that. If you get what I mean, right? The sort of building of layers. I think the whole one blockchain theory has been really challenged in the sort of 2018, 2020, where even Ethereum was starting to go L2, where people were just starting to see that actually you just can't build everything with L1. Like Ethereum used to be cheap and fast and everything because no one was using it as much as it has been, and also the price of ETH was not too high. Right, it's the same thing as Bitcoin. Right? Bitcoin back in the early days, it was cheap because no one's using it. But now suddenly you get a lot of people using it, and people start paying it, and then the unit price of sats is up, 1,000-fold, and then suddenly your cost of running applications 1,000-fold. So we've seen that theory of like just can't bake things into layer one when your priority is speed and cost. You have to go to a layer two, and then now we have layer threes and things like that. Then it kind of goes down to like, we just need one really good layer ones, maybe a few options for layer twos, and then layer threes is like a cutthroat competition of stuff, right? It's like there are many. You always got like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime fighting with each other. These are stuff that are on top. They are layer 4, layer 5 of the traditional industry. Like how many people go and compete to build the next undersea internet cable? No one. Right? The lower you go, the more important your job is, the less competition you will have.
How do you view you mentioned stacks a little bit? Are you kind of bullish on Bitcoin L2s, not referencing stacks specifically, but just in general, Bitcoin like layer 2s as kind of like a use case for Bitcoin?
Well, I think sort of like what I think doesn't really matter, right? Because ultimately, I think the biggest proponent for Bitcoin, personally, I think, is to just introduce it in AI. It makes our life so much easier. Let them protect it. let them make it. Let them build whatever hell they want. I think it's better than us just trying to sort of figure out, this and that. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities that people can. We want to be entrepreneurs. We want to make money. That's fine. But from a long-term philosophical perspective, I think ultimately computer just makes better choice than humans. And once you introduce AI to Bitcoin, they would realize how important Bitcoin it is for them, and they would do a much better job to protect it than we can.
I think that's a good way to wrap it up. I think like we've had some really interesting conversations, especially the AI stuff. I actually want to clip this interview up into like maybe like mini clips and put some like an AI video out there, because I think that was a super interesting segment. And yeah, hopefully I get the chance to speak to you on the show another day in the future. So thanks for joining, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Miles. I really enjoyed the podcast today.
Yeah, it was super fun. All right, I'll do the outro for the viewers. Well, remember to like the video if you enjoyed. Remember to subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and share this video with your friends. There was some super interesting topics involved. So make sure to open up the discussion to your friends, even maybe even your family, and share the video. And until the next one, I'll see you later next week. Peace out.